So my name's Sean Woodward. I'm an occultist, an artist, a writer and a musician. I've been studying the occult and practicing it since around the age of 12 or 13 when I first read the works of Aleister Crowley and also the British occultist Kenneth Grant. And it was through Kenneth Grant's works, particularly Cults of the Shadow, that as a 13-year-old I discovered the work of Michael Bertio, a voodoo Gnostic occultist and magician living in Chicago. And the influence of his work with voodoo and the voodoo spirits led me 10, 11 years ago to making contact with Michael Bertio and in time becoming the British Grand Master of his occult order, Ordo Templi Orientis La Couvent Noire. The interesting thing about the work of the order is that when Michael Bertio published his seminal work, the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, within it he included a lot of the papers of the order and made public really a sort of textbook on how to work with it without necessarily being a member. So the first part of his book is called the Lucky Hoodoo Grimoire, and it explains how a student can contact the hoodoo spirits themselves and through that open up the doors to the world of the spirits and the world of the voodoo Gnostic. And I should say that it differs from traditional voodoo that most people will be familiar with, you know, from the voodoo of Haiti or the Louisiana voodoo of New Orleans, in that it encompasses many other esoteric branches such as Western Hermeticism, Masonic teachings, and what people would think of as magical practices. The works of Aleister Crowley and his own contact with predator-human intelligences such as Lam or Aiwas or the Wizard Abolthaya. So the voodoo Gnostic path, I tend to think, probably includes something for everyone. And it also differs in a few other ways in that there aren't blood sacrifices as there are in traditional voodoo. That is very much seen as not being something which the spirits are happy with, and there are other ways of making offerings. One of them, surprisingly, is the creation of art, and this goes really to the notion that, as in traditional voodoo, when the lower ride their horses, when they mount their priests and priestesses, the Huguns and the Mambos, they push aside their consciousness. And one of the reasons they do this is to inhabit the world again, because these spirits, these lower, were once ancestors, were once humans themselves. And so from time to time, they want to re-experience what it is to be alive in the world today. So other offerings, things like art, they appreciate the tangible forms of that and are actually able to take energy and power from offerings such as that. There was a lot of material that was published in that book that also includes papers of La Couvent Noire, the Black Snake Society, which is the more voodoo facing. So the order is kind of double-headed. The Ordo Templi Orientis Antiga is the more Gnostic influence side of it. It has Gnostic rites, a more kind of ecclesiastical approach, a more ritualistic approach, whereas La Couvent Noire is more of the pure voodoo and working with the voodoo spirits. And in particular, the Jean Main family, which founded this branch of voodoo, particularly Gede spirits, the spirits of the dead, are very much associated with the family and by extension with the order itself. And so there is a lot of a kind of, I guess you could call, darker aspect to the work of La Couvent Noire because of this. And we see other families of spirits that work particularly with the order, such as the Spider lower of Baron Tariglen, and ones that are lesser known in the West. People may be familiar from movies with Baron Samedi or Baron Cemetery, but these other families of spirits are very closely associated with La Couvent Noire and with the work we do. And essentially that work at its bottom level is dealing with the eradication of psychic evil in the world. And so those spirits, those darker forces are employed in that aim. So Keys to the Hoodoo Kingdom was a book I wrote in response to my own experiences working with the voodoo spirits and the work of Michael Bertio. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is that Michael's own works can be quite difficult for people to really understand and find an easy route into them. Because Michael himself has a very wide set of knowledge skills, from the Gnostic to the Hermetic to Voodoo, and sort of way beyond through various mathematical, scientific research areas, etc. You then throw in various religious aspects too. In the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, we find references to Shintotronics, to Zothria, to magical machines, to transplutonic and transyugothian time stations, and all these kind of things that to a newcomer must seem quite strange. And so Keys to the Hoodoo Kingdom approaches many of these topics in a way that it makes them easy to understand for people. And there's also a large sort of question and answer section in the middle where I canvassed people specifically for questions and for subjects that they were finding difficulties with at the time. And so for many, it's been a very useful book because it helps them to understand the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook and really to understand the scope. Since writing that first book, I wrote a second volume called Keys to the Inner Kingdom, which was really more about my own expressions of magic in this path, and how you could take everyday life and everyday experiences and make them magical. Because one of the other key points is that with the Voodoo Gnostic work, it doesn't matter where you are in time or space, geographically or otherwise. In Voodoo, we think very much of the crossroads as the place where Legba can be encountered, and as the gateway keeper, he enables the other spirits to then come through. But that crossroads can be anywhere. We can find it at the foot of our feet. We don't have to be standing on a Caribbean island. And so Keys to the Inner Kingdom is an extension of that, in that it looks at all the different ways in which we can reinterpret everyday experiences and make them more magical. And currently I'm working on the third book, Keys to the Voodoo Kingdom, which goes back, and in the way that the first one was about the hoodoo, those helper spirits that came from Atlantis, then the Voodoo one is more about the death spirits, about Baron Zaragwin and the spider sorcerers, and the ways in which that can be harmonized and utilized. And these three books really are the bedrock of my work, but there are many other I've published which also feed into it, because the more I found working with the spirits and working with time with them, was that there was this shift. You had ancient references to Atlantis and prior, and futuristic references to Zothria and beyond. And everything sort of switches back and forth between them at the same time. But going backwards to the source of the hoodoo spirits coming from Atlantis, but where did they come from? And what I was able to discover was they came from beyond the stars. They came from the systems of Orion and Sirius and Cygnus. They were the ones that came to Earth long ago. And so all my work builds upon this. I've written 3 science fiction novels, Archonics, Necronics, and Aeonics, which deal with that subject of the extraterrestrial aspects of it in a fiction format, because I just felt it would be easier on the reader to approach it from that angle. And so much of the work I did in the underlying extraterrestrial work